Welcome to Doc's Lab and our second Master Series. Welcome to Doc's Lab and our second Master Series. I do believe this is the 110th video in our second Master Series, the 59th video in our basic processors, the 22nd video on sculpting processors, and the 6th video on saturation. In this video, we're going to talk about some other applications of implementing the saturation. Namely, we're going to talk about automation, gates, samplers, synths, and things like that. And how to apply it like that. So basically, we talked about automation in the noise segment and how to apply that. So you want to review that because you can apply those same principles to saturation in some track on here. And also review the videos that we talked about gates and expanders and things like that, because you can also apply that here also. And also look at the videos that we talked about in that noise segment about applying noise with samplers and things like that, because we can apply that here also. We're not going to get quite so in depth in this video. We're just going to kind of review that and reiterate that it's possible to apply it in this area also. So basically, we talked about we can add our saturation directly on the track like we talked about, and a bunch of other ways so far in this saturation segment. But we can also take and route the audio from the main track into another track or a bus or an FX bus, and we can put our saturation plugins or distortion plugins or whatever we have on there on that track, and in conjunction with that we can do that dry like that and blend them together, or we can do them with automation. We can sit there, we can put a gate on that other track so the audio is coming in is controlled a little bit like the gate like we talked about in the noise segment, or with automation we can transfer that automation that we talked about in the noise segment off of one of the noise tracks onto the saturation track so that it's even given more control. So you can control your saturation on the other track immensely. So that gives you a lot of control power in case you are applying even or odd harmonics and non-harmonic distortion, but you're having problems controlling it. It's out of whack a little bit, and because of its levels, and you can try to tame it a little bit by blending it from another track or FX bus or a bus, or in ways we're talking about there. You can also take and put it on your noise track. Let's say you just have an analog warmth track, or you have both analog warmth and sculpting track. You can put those saturation, distortion plugins, whatever, on that track because it already has the automation on there. So you're going to hear, if with the automation on there and enabled to record, that it's going to play the audio on that track, the noise, and it'll play the audio coming into here on top of it that is going to be getting affected by this plugin you have on there. And so this gives you mountains of control. Sometimes it can get a little complicated, so you really got to think about it. The better engineer you get, the more complicated stuff you come into trying to get everything to sound as good as possible, dude. So, and especially on stuff that's out front. The more out front it is, the more times you're going to really want control. So if you're running a really basic setup for most of the time, it's not, sometimes you want to be able to pull something out of the drop of a hat, out of your hat, that's, I can use this for this application or situation or whatever you're doing, especially if you're working on like movie score stuff, or you're working on a lot of different genres. So these are some ideas to help you work on that. So you might want to review some of those videos that were in noise that are directly related to the topics we're talking about here, and apply those same concepts here, just using saturation though, instead of just using it with noise, because it's basically the same concept. So those are some really simple ways, besides other ways we talk about implementing it, to help you, to give you more ways to control the saturation so you have even more control. It sounds funny. People tell me, how can I have my cheap microphone sound like it's a $50,000 microphone? Well, the more control you have of all the elements that are in the end product, noise, saturation, distortions, harmonic contents, equalization, the better chance you have is making whatever you have sound better, right? So besides that, there's other things also. You know, in those videos we talked about applying noise with samplers. So we can do this the same way. With samples, we can put different samples on here and apply it in the ways we talked about in noise. All kinds of different samples, from violins to I mean, a violin has a lot of even and odd harmonics and a really nice mixture that makes it a nice smooth sound, and a nice mixture of noise also. And that sample brought up underneath a vocal or whatever you're doing, or something farther back in the mix, lightly adds this great saturation and noise and this other texture. So this can branch into a whole lot of realms. You got to be real careful. Samples that are really, you know, complex samples that are really wild stuff is going to make, you know, stuff like a vocal or, you know, guitar or bass not sound like a guitar or bass, not sound like you're just trying to tint it or something like that, like we would be doing with saturation, distortion, and stuff like that. But you can apply it like that and use to accomplish both those things, because you'd be adding noise, you'd be adding saturations and harmonic content slightly up underneath into the sound by using a sampler or something like that, and have some really nice, cool effects, depending on what kind of sampler. So there's a lot of experimentation there. And also synths. You can use a synth to just add raw, you know, sawtooth waves or triangle waves or clipping square waves that are going to add odd harmonics, even and odd harmonics in different ways that are like saturation effects, and used with automation or the way we talked about doing it when we talked about using these type of tools, samplers and things like that, noise, and applying it here. You can do it the same way to have some really cool effects to make things sound really nice. And the better you get at utilizing them and implementing them, you know, it's stuff, especially stuff farther back in the mix, that you can manipulate a lot looser to where, because, and just be careful of causing mud. Does that make sense? Like we talked about there. But these are all valid ways to help saturate your tracks, and some ways that you can add noise, saturation, and harmonic content and sample content behind it also, so you get kind of a blended mixture of that. So that's a pretty simple thing. I just kind of wanted to embellish on the last videos we talked about as far as implementing the saturation, and with the ways we've talked about so far, that you should have plenty of options to implement the saturation that we need to into just about any type of situation. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video, and I will see you in the next one.